Well, good morning, everybody. Today's plan is to cover the long-range forecast first. We have the new data in from the Climate Prediction Center. Ironically, it came in about 10 minutes after I recorded yesterday. And what we're going to do after that is cover the near-term forecast. And then I'm going to come back to one particular analog year that I can't seem to kind of get out of my head. I just want to explain why. I just want to show you what I'm thinking about with that particular year. And we'll finish this up with a bit of a global outlook. So we showed earlier in the week the new Climate Prediction Center outlook for the likelihood of having La Nina develop. And as it states in the headline, a 60% chance by summer is what they're currently calling for. You can make an argument that already, we kind of showed this yesterday, that the atmosphere, the trade winds are behaving in a La Nina-like way. Stronger easterly wind bursts. It's moved the MJO around a bit, although it's still kind of stuck in null space. But we've restructured the way the trade winds are behaving across the Pacific Ocean. That's going to be critical for the rest of this season. So let's get into their forecast. This is what they released for the month of May. So the temperature outlook on the left and the precipitation outlook on the right. And there are parts of this that make a lot of sense to me, but there are other things I'm struggling a bit with to understand in their forecast. So let's kind of compare their forecast to the European model, and we'll also compare it to the analogs just to kind of get a better sense of maybe what the differences and similarities are. So that's their May forecast. Let me take you to the latest European outlook. We're going to start with precipitation. As we've been noting, the European model kind of continues to paint an area in through here and even a little bit into the southeast, which could have near normal to possibly even drier than normal conditions. And does that line up a bit with our historical analogs? Well, let's go have a look. It kind of does. You use all of those years where there was an El Nino in winter that was gone by spring, and there were at times open windows in this area. But just to let you know, the current pattern we're in, should it persist into May, which I don't have any reason to say that it wouldn't, I think we're going to see more of what we've just recently seen in here, which is at least twice a week, the likelihood of some sort of a short wave that could kick off severe weather in so much of the eastern 2/3 of the countries once you kind of jump off the Rocky Mountains. So I know I jumped quickly to my analog years, but let's go back to the model. Interesting that better precipitation is forecast for parts of the Canadian Prairie through the Northern Plains, through the Great Lakes states, and into the Northeast as well. And this maybe would be a bit more symptomatic of that kind of checkmark pattern where the flow comes in and dips over the western United States. You get the southwest flow over the Rocky Mountains, which means we may have systems that eject both north and south, so they could kind of come in from multiple areas. Now, we have to pay attention to this in May because what sends the jet stream in, looking at the directions I've just drawn here, is troughs of low pressure that like to originate somewhere in the Gulf of Alaska or along the coast of British Columbia. And if you think about what that means later in summer, if these troughs of low pressure continue, we don't get the extended flow out of it that just keeps going and going and going, because by summer, when we just naturally, seasonally lose some of the momentum, troughs of low pressure here end up resulting in broader areas of high pressure and therefore heat and potential drought issues in the other, most of the rest of North America. So just understand that the frequency of these lows, should it persist into June and beyond, especially into July, that becomes a bit of a red flag. You'll see the ocean temperatures go colder here. I know it's off the drawing, but you get that idea. We've kind of covered that. So west being drier, not necessarily a problem. We need to actually dry out a bit across parts of the west. And the question is about the temperatures. And this is where there's going to be a little bit of a difference. If you look at the latest May outlook from the European model, it still kind of has that cooler feedback. And I often blame this on a snow feedback because I see it every spring. But this particular year, we have continued to keep cooler air in the west at times. And the warm-ups that happen, they last for 3 or 4 days, and then another trough dives in. And so I'll have to look at that again, but this particular pattern would be that look, right? So you have these pre-storm significant warm-ups where the temperatures are really, really climbing and get much above average, but then there's a drop in temperatures that follows with an active May pattern, which is kind of what we are predicting. Let's come back again one more time to look at that precipitation outlook, though. Big question marks remain down here. Now, I know that this next weekend and then getting beyond, it's going to be very, very wet down here in this part of Texas. And I'm wondering if we're just seeing that persistence in the model. In other words, it's just sticking around with this precipitation pattern. But I'm worried, as you all know, about the dryness that's anchored right here and how that could be basically used as a positive feedback in the system as a way of expanding going forward. So that's the European model. And let's just go back quickly to the analogs. There is agreement between the CPC and the analogs with the mild conditions in the Pacific Northwest. It's not there in the European model, but it's there in the analogs. And the only concern about this would be an earlier melt of the snowpack that is throughout the Northwest, and how quickly that gets into reservoirs and how well it's managed. That's going to be a tricky thing should this verify. I think it might be biased a bit too warm. That's the way I would look at the analogs. And I think this is biased too cold. Even though it's just a shade under average, I just think we need to consider that the likelihood of it being a cool May is not necessarily what I'm thinking. There was a question the other day about a May 6th through the 8th frost event. I can't find it out there looking at all of the models. So just said, hey, is there any truth to the 6th through 8th frost event? But it is a reminder that a May frost across the northern tier of the United States, kind of in this area, is common. That's not it would be uncommon farther to the south is the main idea here. So we look at all of that and we come back to kind of our scenario, and that is we've been using to make these analog forecasts and look at these individual years, this graphic. And it just looks at the Ocean Nino index, and we've been trying to identify those years where we've hit a big El Nino and we've fallen off. Now today at the end of this video, I'm going to come back to a year that I just can't seem to shake, and that would be 2020. And I want to look at that one closely one more time just because of some of the similarities I'm seeing in 2020 to some of the forecast models, which we're going to review in a second as well. Next week, we're going to make a big composite view of all of this so we can kind of see some of the differences all at once on one page. I'll do that for you on Monday. And I still think we should dig deeper into one more year, which would be 1973. That one, really strong El Nino, followed by a really strong La Nina. And there are some models that are predicting that really major drop-off into La Nina. When I was in Arizona yesterday, I did get a question, how often do La Ninas follow El Ninos? Most of the time. And then how long do they last? Well, a lot of times we get kind of a double dip following it. So we could be looking at another couple of years of La Nina following this. Doesn't guarantee, but it's just a possibility that we could be more favored toward that phase just based on history. Okay, so let's do this model summary looking at the data from BAUM. I love this website. It's going to summarize all the models for us. And I want to make a point about the Bureau of Meteorology's forecast, which again, that's from Australia. Their prediction for the sea surface temperatures in the middle of the Pacific along the equator, Nino region 3.4, is that they're not going aggressively cold. In fact, they're keeping INSO-neutral conditions all the way through our hurricane season. And what I'd like to do is, we've done this before, I just want to show you the model differences. So again, you've got the Australians, the Canadians, the Europeans, the Japanese, the French, the US, and the British. These are all different forecasting centers. And May to June and June to July, it's pretty clear that the Canadians, NOAA, and the British are the most aggressive on possibly by July breaking into La Nina territory with ocean temperatures, which would already mean, if we're seeing the ocean temperatures, that the trade winds have dramatically increased. By August, that's when the Bureau of Meteorology hits neutral. I mean, not it's neutral, but right here at 0, they're back to normal. And by September, it's interesting to note that we just continue to see building from the Canadian model, the US models here, and the British. The European is slower in developing this, and so is the Bureau of Meteorology. So I always find this just instructive because we often compare the models. And so what we're going to do next is review one more time the European model against NOAA. These are kind of two of the on the more extreme side of this. And we've looked at this. That's this slide. But before we get to this slide, can I at least show you my analogs? I've been really honestly this week trying to question the validity of this analog forecast. I've made a case over the last few weeks that stitching them all together, I think a hot and stormy summer for the Corn Belt, parts of the central United States. In other words, Missouri Valley, Mississippi Valley, Ohio Valley could have a lot of ridge riding storms. And I made a case, I thought the ridge could be in one of these three spots. And regardless of where the drought could set up between these areas, we thought it was going to be a hotter summer, especially with warm overnight lows, with no strong, anomalous temperature signal showing up in the west. But I'll just be honest with you, given some new evidence, and even though 2020 is not in my list, but I've been thinking a lot about it, I just want to let you know that thought process is evolving a bit. And we may have to revisit this to see if this is truly a good historical look. And so that's why on Monday, I'm going to show you a panel of all of these years, because I think it'll be valuable to see them in one snapshot to look for similarities and not. Because when I make a composite map out of them and you add them all up and divide by the total number, it's like, it makes such a nice picture. But we just need to look at some of the nuances, and that's important to do as we prepare for this summer. Now let's come back to the models and look at them one more time. Note the differences. Remember, the NMME is mainly giving us the rapid decline into strong La Nina. The El Nino progression into neutral to La Nina is much slower in the European model. So I've kind of labeled it just based on a few things I've observed in the forecast. This is May, June, July. As we get farther out there into June, July, August, there is this idea that the drought that is currently in Mexico, again, we can kind of take a look at that here by looking at the North American Drought Monitor, that this is going to be influencing the pattern a bit, and that drought could migrate into the Four Corner states as we see here. But it is important to note that with the more aggressive development of La Nina, the June, July, August forecast has spread the drought potential out of the Central Plains more toward the Western Corn Belt and even up toward the Great Lakes. It keeps the Southeast stormy. It actually keeps parts of Canada stormy. And there are some similarities in the European model, but the differences are noted, as you can see. That's June, July, August. If we go forward again into July, August, September, both models are expanding dryness to occupy more of the central United States, keeping the Gulf Coast and the Southeast stormy. And then every single forecast I can find right now is supportive of a very active hurricane season, meaning once we get past August, I think into September, giving you a long-range prediction on precipitation is going to be difficult, simply because the remnants of one could easily make their way into huge sections of the whole Mississippi, Missouri, Ohio Valley, and everywhere before that, getting to the Gulf. This also includes the Northeast as well. I guess I could say a bit more confidently that getting a system to spin up in the East Pacific, come across Mexico, and hit from this side is of lower probability this year. So we've now seen the models. We looked at the analogs. We looked at May closely. I will come back in a few moments to 2020 and why I think 2020 is interesting. But before we get there, I would like to just kind of give a quick review of the near-term pattern and what it means compared to where we've been. We know that the temperatures are dropping rapidly. I was sent over Twitter a look at the morning low temperatures yesterday in Montana, and a lot of single digits. So when you look back since the beginning of April and see the mild air, just understand that Montana has gone through a wild ride on temperatures. We're about to knock all of this back while the West finally picks up a little bit of heat. But you're going to see again in the pattern, there are 2 more instances over the next 15 days of West Coast troughs, which means the warm-up will not be sustained for a whole 15-day time period in the western United States, which is way behind on heat units. So we'll talk about that in a second, but first some precip information. My eye is immediately drawn to Kansas in this map. And while the AHPS, I often show you their precipitation percent of normal maps, while that's being repaired, it's been down all week, as has the WPC. We're going to rely on this to kind of find that epicenter of very dry conditions. We did get some storms into this area last night, which helped. But I would just make the argument that this extends much farther to the south into this area, as evidenced by some of the satellite data yesterday. Red River Valley of the North, surrounding areas, on the whole a bit drier. The Columbia Basin, central part of Washington, a bit drier. And while we've had some very wet conditions across northern Illinois, southern Wisconsin, and parts of Iowa as of late, we still have an underlying soil moisture issue kind of in this whole area that needs to continue to be worked against, just for the water health of this growing season. If you just think about this whole area and the fact that its growing season is primarily April to October, we need to get the soil moisture profile in a better position to possibly withstand drier episodes later this year. But into the Northeast, things are quite wet. We still have a really good snowpack in the west, especially in the upper and lower Colorado Basin and the Sierra Nevada mountains. And so that kind of gives us a quick assessment on our water health across the United States. All right, this morning, sun's rising here across the country. This is the storm system that yesterday, there we go, we got refresh. Yesterday came through and brought some pretty nasty weather. I got to watch this. I was so lucky last night. Basically flew into Dallas, made my flight, went over all of this haze and dust here that was in Texas, could not see the ground from the flight. We snuck in here. The storms did not blow up over Dallas, but we flew right along the storms that kind of stretched from here up to Illinois. And it's kind of odd. I had the aisle seat and I wanted to watch the storm, so I just kind of looked across the guy next to me. Hope he wasn't too weirded out by it, but I wanted to see him. They were amazing. I didn't get any pictures though because I thought that would be weird. But these were some large storms in through this area last night. We added more to our severe storms reports. There has been reports of a tornado in Illinois, but a lot of this was hail and straight line wind damage. As you can see, are coming out of Missouri into Illinois, Indiana, and parts of Kentucky with a few scattered events farther to the south. That brings our kind of 3-day hail total map to this. And we're just kind of looking here for some early season hail damage from the storms that we've seen so far this week. Total precipitation over the last 7 days, 72 hours, is shown here. And overall, we have a lot of places like in parts of Kansas, but getting into Missouri and Illinois, the Ohio River, and Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin. These were areas that needed good spring moisture ahead of planting because there's still a lot of planting to be done in this. So we could look back on this system and quickly find the haves and have-nots, but it's just important to see where that moisture has recently been coming through. Okay, this morning, just pulling up a quick radar animation. Let me get that reset for you. This is what we're keeping an eye on. So some snow showers north. We're going to talk about snow potentially falling in this area later today. But these storms, thankfully, as they continue to progress to the east, are going to be sub-severe. We're going to bring some widely scattered showers into the northeast. So today's marginal risk over parts of the Carolinas, parts of Virginia, but getting down into Georgia and Alabama. That's what we've got. And by tomorrow, we're just going to watch that front linger here, and the chance for some stronger storms comes way down into southern Texas. So all hazards map at 6:15 this morning. Still have some strong winds in Montana. This is a bit of a surprise because we do expect snow to come out of Colorado, but they've only got the winter weather advisory in the mountains here. But notice National Weather Service has already put out a freeze warning and a frost advisory on the southern side of this as we're expecting these cold temperatures to move in this weekend into this area. Let's go to the high-res NAM just to kind of get a good place to pick up with the precipitation. So playing through the middle of the day today into this afternoon and this evening, again, we're just going to watch for some of these storms here. Take a look at the snow that's expected to come off the front range hitting this part of Colorado, and some kind of convective snow on the back side of the low here, as the upper level temperatures are quite cold despite the cold air near the surface as well. So getting into tonight and playing into the early morning hours tomorrow, there's just a couple of pieces to this. You've got this large area of high pressure that's coming in like this, and we can see the snow that's expected to fall here. Our frontal boundary is just lingering in this area, but it's still being fed with good moisture, so we're going to watch for showers and thunderstorms to fire up down here, Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana. And that's through the early morning hours on Saturday, playing into Saturday evening. As we work our way toward early Sunday morning, the rain, heaviest of which comes over parts of the lower Mississippi Valley and then moves into the southeast. Now, this will be the kind of the result of the high pressure building in and the cold that's going to follow through this weekend. And we're going to take a look at that frost map in a few seconds. But automatically, we're going to turn our attention back to the west. So here's the broader trough that's sweeping some of that cold air in and the high pressure that results on the back side of it. But by Sunday, getting into Monday, little shortwave sneaks across British Columbia into Alberta, goes right over the Red River Valley of the North. I'll show you what that one's going to do. And then by the time we get out there to the 24th and 25th, we once again have kind of a pair of troughs coming into the west. So there's that flow. You get kind of a storm-induced warm-up out ahead of it, and then the broader trough dips down there. This is next Thursday, getting into Friday. And this suggests that next weekend we're going to be talking about very strong winds, all coming out of the south here, an area in through here that we're going to have to watch out for this risk of strong to severe storms. This again would be maybe Friday night into Saturday next week, and that presses east. And then just take note, by the 29th, we have, another trough coming in like this. So this is my comment earlier about these troughs that keep coming out of the Gulf of Alaska. And that one dives into the west, meaning the start of May is likely going to be active for severe weather here. But just take note of the position of these troughs, and let's do a quick comparison to the artificial intelligence, because if we're concerned about some frost in early May, it's going to be from like a deep trough that just is connected north to south, delivering cold air. As it stands, I just see systems kind of coming through and ejecting over the mountains, meaning that the risk, I think, in this whole area for strong to severe storms as we get into the end of April and start of May is high. I think we're going to continue to see that quite a bit as we go forward. So how about a quick rundown of the models, and then we'll get to this 2020 idea again. This is the next 7 days from the AI forecasting system. You can see the wettest conditions coming out of Texas toward the lower Mississippi River Valley. We see a lot of that coming right now. This is the 10-day outlook, though. So I just added the last 3 days onto this, and that's when I think those troughs that start here on like the 24th, 25th, they start to eject and give us the risk of those severe storms and more moisture coming into this part of the country. I am working on setting up a validation system for all the models so we can kind of look back over a 10-day time period and see who got it right and who got it wrong. It might take me a little bit longer to develop, but I'd like to be able to incorporate that into these forecasts. This is the national blend of models, their latest update on the next 7 days of total accumulated precipitation. Parts of Texas grabbing maybe 2 inches in total out of this. But remember, it's after the next 7 days that the very end of April goes over very active in the midsection of the country. So the GFS and finally the European operational run. We'll do a little bit of model comparison like we always do. GFS left, European right. We've taken a good look at this storm system clearing east. We then watch Friday night getting into Saturday morning the snow. That's expected here. It's in both models. The stalled out front over Texas that moves over the lower Mississippi River Valley by Sunday morning, brings its rain into the southeast by Sunday night, and clears by Monday. We have the shortwave that follows right here. It's in both models. This is the weak low that came out of British Columbia, ran across the U.S.-Canada border on Monday. There it is trying to curl up over the Great Lakes, bringing another chance for some light precipitation here. It's in both models as well. And we're going to let that scoot on through. And then the question will be out there on the 24th, how much cool air do we get into the northwest? We'll take a look at that, or excuse me, the northeast. And then in the northwest, how does the next low develop? So this is out to next Wednesday. I'm going to play quickly through the end of this because what we see is, there it is, right? So watch that again. The 24th through the 27th, there is an event happening as these troughs line themselves up along the west and just come over the mountains. Looks like there'll be a wave that goes through Canada, and there'll be a broader wave to the south that comes out of California, Arizona, New Mexico, and ejects into the plains. So this means starting next Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, this would be the 24th through the 28th, expect that to be an active time period in the midsection of the country. On the precipitation probability side, this is the chance of getting an inch just over the next 3 days, so highest in Texas. Then as we get into early next week, we start to see some of that increasing here over this part of Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, and Michigan. And then as we play past the 25th, now watch, this is when I expect things to get active. This all opens back up. Wide open Gulf of Moisture transport. And we just seem to set us up for, again, the 24th through the 28th, an active go of the pattern here. On the 2-inch side of this, sorry, I got that new model run in. On the 2-inch side of this, just over the next 2 weeks, the highest chances are down here in Texas. And if we look who's drier over the next 2 weeks, this is the probability of staying under a 1/2 inch. So we get back into that same worry zone here, but take note that a lot of the Canadian prairie, Montana, slipping into the northern plains, we do see better chances of staying on the drier side of these wetter numbers we just talked about. But take a look at the week 2 forecasts. I mean, they're showing that activity. Again, this is like the 26th through the 2nd. And all 3 modeling systems have that next one erupting out of the southwest, coming over the mountains. And because there's kind of 2 waves stacked up into week 2 to finish April and begin May, we got a lot going on here. So I take note of this active into this month. Temperature-wise, here's our newest frost map. And as we have a look at this, we've now dropped that frost area a little bit farther to the south here over the next 7 days. If we take a look at those minimum temperatures, this was this morning. As we go forward into tomorrow morning on Saturday and Sunday, finally some moderation coming into parts of Montana. But there's the frost line on Sunday according to the NDFD. Monday still cool all the way down to the Gulf Coast while the west gets a little bit of a warm-up. This is next Tuesday and Wednesday. See the next chill down here of some frosty temperatures. That'd be through the 24th. And then the 25th, we get this over into parts of the Northeast. Now, just as a reminder, I, back in March, thought that tax day would be the day that we'd get through this. But we've got a little bit of a late season cool down across the northern tier of the U.S. It is not uncommon for frost events like this, but a bit of a misstep in the forecast, thinking we'd be more mild than we currently are. High temperature-wise, here's today's highs. Getting into tomorrow, very cold into Texas on Saturday. Sunday, all across the Cotton Belt, very, very cold temperatures compared to historical averages. The West continues to get a brief interlude of warm weather here on Monday into Tuesday. But remember, on the 24th, that's when the trough lives off the West. It's going to come out and rip across the central United States. So by Wednesday and Thursday, here's the pre-trough warm-up that we're expecting to come off the mountains, and do expect it to get very windy here mid to late week next week. Overall, though, the day 5 through 10 shows the cooler air exiting the northeast, the colder air coming into the west with the trough. But day 10 through 15 does continue to show more mild conditions. And that was being echoed in the newest European model forecast as well. The ensemble, there's day 5 through 10. Here's day 10 through 15. Those western troughs have been persistent, and that's why we see the cooler air here. All right, let's finish this up. I am still stuck on 2020, and I need to talk it over with my colleagues a bit more to have just some better look at it. But here's what I'd like to do for you. This is current ocean temperatures, and this was 2020. And even though we were cooler along the West Coast in 2020, we have to pay attention to the rate at which the ocean temperatures in the Atlantic warmed or maintained their warmth, and what happened with La Nina. Because if you were just to ask me to draw for you a forecast of this year's ocean temperatures by July, this is what I would have drawn you. And what this is this is the July ocean temperatures from 2020. And if we use these skin temperatures of the ocean as a metric by which we gauge the behavior of the atmosphere, this would tell me that it would be likely, if this happens, to maybe expect a progression of precipitation, something like this. Now, you all know this. A single analog year doesn't exist as a match. It just doesn't. But if I had to pick a closest one, this is just the one that I'm thinking about right now. So this is how May panned out in 2020 in terms of precipitation compared to average. All right. Not exactly the same May forecast I gave you at the beginning, but it's not necessarily May that I'm considering. It's later. Into June, we see quite a bit of a dry signal across a broad section of the U.S., don't we? And as we get into July, it got really stormy. And does that fit our hot, stormy narrative? It kind of does. I mean, I can't say that that hot, stormy narrative for this whole region doesn't exist in this pattern. But that's what happened in July of 2020. And if we go then into the pattern, this is what I think will be interesting to watch. If the ocean temperatures evolve such that warmth pushes into this area, we get high pressure forming here. But I don't see a split flow problem into the west. I see troughs that kind of come out, and with no major southeast ridge in the works down here, I don't also see major drought in the southeast, which is why we kind of get spotty thunderstorm activity, very active thunderstorm activity. There's ridging way up here. And that's going to be critical if this is the pattern that develops as to giving us what we just saw there in the month of July. A hot and stormy July for a lot of places. Beyond that, what about August? Now, August seems to match what the European model is suggesting, doesn't it? Remember, it kept everything kind of stormy and wet here, but it saw this dryness kind of expanding with limited thunderstorm activity, but the dryness expanding out of the plains. And don't forget, in the middle of August, well, not the middle, but August 10th, that Monday morning, we had the massive derecho that came out here. Now, I am, of course, not calling for a repeat of this. We can't do that. That's not possible. But I would like to bring your attention to a study. Let's see. Here we go. This was done by the NOAA, and this is just on their main website looking at derecho events. And they made a really nice graphic here that talks about the frequency of derecho events. And given that my forecast is calling for a hot and stormy summer for a lot of the country, it is important to note that the primary thunderstorm mode, once you get past June, is linear, straight line wind issues. And so we just need to look at this and assess it. It's not a guarantee, but those summer thunderstorms come in with wind damage and some hail, but they also deliver timely rains. So again, that's August. If we look at the summer temperatures, we got hot in the southwest. There's quite a bit of above average temperatures throughout the Midwest. If there was a spot that was near normal, it was part of the Mid-South. And that's June to September. And in 2020, of course, we followed it up with a pressure pattern across the Atlantic that featured a large high right here. And whenever we bring in high pressure that sits right here, just a little displaced from Bermuda, this is just an open path for tropical systems to go underneath it. There's no big southeast ridge to block them or stop them. And that was one of the reasons why in 2020 we got into a very, very active hurricane season. Sorry, let me skip that and get here. So that's the hurricane season. Now that graphic I just showed you, I kind of had it out of step. I apologize. It was about minimum temperatures. I mentioned hot, stormy summers. I just want to make a point that I think a lot of that heat is in the overnight lows, not necessarily in the super hot daytime highs. But to finish this up with that hurricane season, 31 named systems in 2020. It is the most active on record, and you know right now that most of our major hurricane forecasting centers are going quite aggressive. So I just trying to explain to all of you, just for some accountability, why 2020 sits in my brain so much. But just remember, this could change very quickly as we watch the month of May arrive, but it's just where I sit right now. I'm going to finish this up with 3 last images. Here's our next 10 days in terms of temperatures across the country, across the world. And the narrative's very similar to yesterday. So is the change in precipitation, specifically down here in parts of South America. So this dry area continues to expand in the models, and we have a lot of safrinha crop that's grown into this region, while it's wet north and south of that area in parts of southern Brazil and Argentina, and then up here in the Amazon. The question is, are we going to start to hurt that safrinha crop by not giving it good moisture during pollination and following, which is right now? We probably won't know what the impact of the drier weather that could last into May. We don't know what the impact of that will be until we start harvesting this crop in June and July, but it is a signal toward the drier that's been consistent all week. So with that, I'm going to wrap this whole week up and get into the weekend with all of you and tell you to have a good one, and we'll talk on Monday. Thanks.